All right, today we are very happy to welcome Cory Olson as our first Nature Network Speakers Series presenter for the season. Cory is a professional biologist with over 15 years of experience in bat conservation. He has led research and monitoring projects across Western Canada, collecting thousands of biological samples and analyzing millions of bat echolocation recordings. He has authored several reports and guides on bat management and currently serves as the program coordinator for the Alberta Bat Program with Wildlife Conservation Society Canada. With that, I will mute myself and turn it over to our presenter. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for the introduction, and thanks everyone for joining me on this Thursday evening. The timing is perfect, as you know. Tomorrow is Halloween, and it's also the last day of International Bat Week, a time when we are encouraging everyone to celebrate the importance of bats in our environment. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time today going over the basic biology of bats, and I'm going to be talking about some of the conservation challenges that we're trying to tackle, and I'll go over some of the work that WCS Canada and my colleagues are working on over the last few years. The first thing I want to do is direct everyone's attention to our website. We have links to all our social media channels on this site. We have a Facebook account, a Blue Sky account, Instagram, YouTube, and a few others. And these are the best locations to keep up to date with what's going on in the bat conservation world in Alberta. We also have access to all of our guidebooks that can be downloaded for free. And this is approaching the end of our October fundraising campaign, where we're trying to raise funds to support our conservation programs over the next year. On our website, you can download various guides that we have available. We have one on managing bats in buildings. A lot of people throughout the province have bats living with them, and some like them and others don't, but there's always a good way of managing them that doesn't harm our bat populations. We also have a guidebook for enhancing habitat in urban areas. And we have one for building bat houses. We even have an activity guide that can be downloaded if you need activities for your kids over the break. And recently, we've developed a short brochure summarizing the much longer international bat house best management practices. This is a 4-page brochure that summarizes the most important aspects that should be considered when building a bat house. We also have a bat kit project, a program that we're starting to roll out at libraries. These bat kits have a bat detector, a tablet, and various other information to go along with it that can be checked out from participating libraries. And currently, most of the participating libraries are in rural areas, but we are working on expanding this program. So stay tuned. Now, before I get too far along, I want to make a very important point, which is that some bats do have rabies. So we want to make sure that nobody is handling bats with bare hands. In most cases, the best option if you see a bat is just to leave it alone, but sometimes they do get into living spaces or they get into trouble and need to be moved. In those cases, an adult can put on some leather gloves and use another object like a box to gently contain the bat and move it outdoors. Best option is to put it up high on the side of a tree or at the base of a tree it can climb, or the side of an old building, away from people and pets, and that will allow the bat to recover and to take off into open flight space. But never should a bat be handled with bare hands. And if you do get bitten, it would be important to receive post-exposure treatment. There has not been a rabies case from a bat in Alberta in almost 10 or in almost 20 years. There has never been a rabies case in Alberta since we started our program, and we would definitely like to keep it that way. So if anybody sees a bat, leave it alone and it will leave you alone. There are in the world an enormous number of bat species. There's almost 1,500 living bat species in the world. About 1,500 have already been described. Fortunately, 9 of those are already extinct, so there's not quite 1,500 living species. But most of the bat diversity in the world is concentrated around the equatorial zones of the planet in the tropical and the subtropical regions where climates are a little friendlier and they don't have to figure out how to survive 6 months of the year without food. If anybody wants to keep up to date on the latest bat taxonomy, this just comes from batnames.org. In Canada, however, there's not nearly that number of species. In Alberta, we have only 9 species. We have the second highest bat diversity in Canada, second only to British Columbia, that because of their very diverse and mild climate have at least 15 documented species. The 9 bat species in Alberta can be divided into 2 broad groups. These are the long-distance migratory so-called tree bats. Tree bats is not the most appropriate name because most of our bats live in trees. But these 3 species, they migrate out of Alberta during the winter and find some place that's a little bit warmer and a little bit more milder to spend the winter. That could be the United States or some of the coastal regions. Silver-haired bats might even spend the winter in British Columbia, but Alberta is presumed to be too cold for these 3 species. The hoary bat and the eastern red bat are both part of the same genus, Lasiurus, and they have these incredible colorations. They're also the only 2 species that tend to spend the day roosting in the open, hidden amongst the foliage of living trees. Of the remaining 6 species, or I should say all 6 of the remaining species are thought to hibernate in Alberta during the winter, where they have to spend 6 months of the year without food. 2 of these species account for almost all of the bats that people observe roosting in buildings. Not all of them, but the overwhelming majority of the time, when people find bats living in a building, it's either the big brown bat or the little brown bat, or the little brown myotis, as they're now called. We found that most of the time when people find bats in buildings, it's actually the little brown bat. But both of these species historically would have roosted in the cracks and crevices of old, dead, and decaying trees. And occasionally they would also roost in the crevices along rock faces. So a lot of these now live in buildings or sometimes bridges. Now, if you're wondering how to tell these 2 species apart, the most obvious is that they're different size. The big brown bat is about twice the size of the little brown bat. Little brown bat weighs about 10 grams. The big brown bat weighs about 20 grams. Well, oftentimes we don't have any scale to compare them to. But the big brown bat has this really characteristic light blonde colored hair. Sometimes the little brown bat has the same colored hair, so that doesn't work perfectly. But the big brown bat has that light fur contrasted with a darker facial mask, but it also has really puffy sides to its nose. So if you ever see these, take a really close look at the nose, if you can do so without disturbing the bat. And if it has a puffy nose, probably a big brown bat. And if you're ever wondering if big brown bats and little brown bats can get along, the answer is yes. There's not a whole lot of evidence of territoriality in any of our bats, and they have from time to time been found roosting in direct contact with each other. So in this photo, it's a little brown bat cuddling up next to a big brown bat in a bat house. Oh, and I'll also mention that little brown bats and big brown bats are found all throughout Alberta. The remaining 4 species are all in the genus Myotis, along with little brown bats, but they have much more restricted ranges. The western small-footed Myotis, which is our smallest bat, weighing only about 5 grams, not much heavier than a coin, That species is found primarily in the arid regions of southern Alberta, especially in badland habitats where you have a lot of erosional features that create these crevices and other places where they can hide during the day. The long-eared myotis is also very common in southern Alberta, but it also is very common in the mountains and the foothills region of the province, all the way up into the Northwest Territories. The long-legged myotis is primarily a species of the mountains and foothills. We have documented it fairly recently, all the way up into the Peace Country. The northern myotis, though, is a species that's primarily a forest bat. So this is a species that's most at home in the open understory of old growth forests, especially in the boreal forest, but also in the mountains and foothills. Now, if you're thinking that little brown bats and long-legged myotis look pretty similar, they are. Even us biologists have a hard time telling these two species apart. There are subtle differences in color, but the only reliable method is to look at a very specific feature of their foot. Uh, we call this a keel. There's a little fleshy tab right there off the foot that is diagnostic of this species. So we call a structure going off their foot that provides rigidity to the tail, we call that the calcar. And this little flap right there is called a keel. And that's how we tell these two species apart. So not a lot of difference between those species. The long-eared myotis and the northern myotis, though, they both have ears that are substantially longer, so those ones are easy to tell apart. And the western small-footed myotis is really, really small, which makes that one also easy to identify. The northern myotis, we've documented all throughout the boreal, but just this last year, we also confirmed that it can be found in the park system in Edmonton, which is a proof that these urban parks can still be very productive habitat for bats and other wildlife. One of the remarkable features of bats is that most of them give birth to just one pup per year, and not until they're 2 or 3 years old. This makes them one of the slowest reproducing mammals, especially for their size. The one exception, though, are some of the species that migrate south for the winter. So the hoary bat, the eastern red bat, and the silver-haired bat can both give birth to 2 or more pups per year, probably because they are not under quite the same constraint that our resident bats are, in that they don't have to get their pups ready for hibernation quite as early. The eastern red bat is kind of an oddball among bats. It can give birth to up to 4 pups per year. But none of those are in Alberta, because in Alberta, it's just the males that occur in the province. And to compensate for that really slow reproductive rate, our bats live exceptionally long lives. In North America, the oldest known bat, as far as I am aware, was 39 years, and that actually came from Alberta. So in the 70s and 80s, there was a massive banding program at Catamount Cave in the province, where they attached these bands similar to bird bands, but they have a unique number on them. And 39 years later, a living bat was found with the same band attached to its wing, allowing us to determine that the bat was at least 39 years old. This photo just shows a biologist, possibly myself, attaching a split wing band to this bat, to the forearm of this bat. There's not mass banding programs for bats anymore, because at some point around the 80s and 90s, it was realized that this mass banding program for bats was actually contributing to population declines. So now it's extremely rare to ban bats, and if it is done, it's for a very specific and limited project. And oh, and the bat that lived to 39 years old in Alberta, that was a little brown myotis. There is an older bat in the world. I think it's a Brant's myotis that lived to 41 years old, but that one was in Russia. Right about now, all of our bats should be hibernating. This is a calendar of bat activities specific to Alberta. Bats began their hibernation probably around September or October. Uh, they'll continue to hibernate until March or April, and then as soon as they come out of hibernation, they will make their way to their summer breeding grounds. Even for something like a little brown bat, which is not thought to be a migratory bat, they might still move up to about 600 kilometers between where they spend the winter and where they spend the summer. When they arrive on their summer grounds, the females, assuming they mated the previous year, will already be pregnant, and then they'll give birth sometime around the middle of June to early July. Those young will take about a month to mature and begin flying, and then they'll have a little bit of time to fatten up in preparation for winter. The adult bats will fly to their hibernation sites around late July or August, and they'll do something called swarming, which is a period where bats mate. All bats in all bats require three resources. Actually, this is true of pretty much all animals. There's three resources that are critical for their survival, and that includes food, water, and shelter. All of the bats in Canada eat nothing but bugs. So you might hear that bats are really important for pollination. You might hear that bats are really important for seed dispersal. That is absolutely true in the tropical and the subtropical regions of the planet, but it's not true in Canada. All of our bats are eating nothing but bugs. Mostly it's insects that are flying at night, and it might also include uh, other other arthropods like spiders. We did a project a few years ago where we collected guano from bridges, and we sent it to a laboratory for DNA barcoding. And from that, we detected hundreds of arthropod species in the guano. So as they eat their insects, they poop it out, and that feces contains the DNA of all of the food that they ate in that period. And most of these were collected at bridges, uh, but at least for that sample, the most important group of insects, and this is mostly for little brown bats, but the most important group were the dipterans, the true flies, and primarily the chironomids or the midges. But all bats have very diverse diet. The larger bats, they will specialize on the larger insects. So a species like a hoary bat or an eastern red bat, they will eat large numbers of moths and other large-bodied insects. The smaller bats will eat the smaller insects. We even found crickets in those samples, and we think that species like long-eared myotis that are supremely adapted at gleaning insects off of surfaces are probably picking them off the ground or off of the surface of vegetation. Elsewhere in the world, bats are far more diverse. There's many species that specialize on eating fruit, and they're really important for dispersing seeds. There's also lots of species that specialize on drinking nectar, and they're really important for pollination. There's even three species that specialize on drinking blood, and those are the vampire bats that are found in Central and South America. Now, this photo, the photo of the bat approaching the cactus, is actually a pallid bat, which is more of an insectivorous bat, but it's been found pollinating flowers in the United States. The species is also found in British Columbia, but so far as I know, it doesn't pollinate any flowers there. The other resource that bats need is access to drinking water. Unlike swallows, they're not landing to drink. They don't land at a puddle to drink. They instead drink while flying. And they're very maneuverable. So the smaller, more maneuverable bats can drink from a pretty small puddle, but they're not landing. So they need access to still water that's free of obstacles. They skim right above the water surface. They drop their jaw into the water and they can take a drink. So water in most areas is not terribly difficult to access, but water quality is really important to the health of bats. You can see the photo on the left, beautiful, clear, still water. That would be perfect for bats. The wetland on the right, very eutrophic, covered in duckweed, no accessible water. In urban areas, bats have also been known to drink from stormwater ponds or sewage lagoons where they can be exposed to all sorts of microbes and contaminants. And the last resource that bats need is shelter. And we call places where bats rest during when they're not flying, we call those roosts. So we don't say there's bat nests. There's no such thing as a bat nest because none of the bats are modifying, at least none of the bats in Canada are modifying their environment. So they're not building nests, they're not bringing in insulation. They're entirely reliant on pre-existing structures in their environment. They also don't chew holes. So if they can't get in, they can't use it. But how they stay warm instead of building a nest is that a lot of the bats, most of the bats, except for the hoary bat and the eastern red bat, most of the bats huddle together. So they're using this social thermal regulation to save energy. And different species will use different structures. The most important across Alberta are probably dead or decaying trees. Historically, they also would have used the deep cracks and crevices of feet of rocks or rock features, such as cliffs. Now, at least two of our species very frequently use buildings. One of the best structures for bats, based on the number of reports we get, are patio umbrellas. So we have tables, information booths all across Alberta, and the one feature that comes up more often than anything almost is these patio umbrellas. And interestingly, it's not just the big brown bat and the little brown bat that'll use patio umbrellas. Silver-haired bats will also use them. But trees, of all those features, are probably the most important. So when we're talking about roosting habitat, we can break this down further into night roosts, which are sites used during the night to rest, and day roosts, which are sites used during the day to rest. So night roosts are only used temporarily. They're often more exposed. They land there temporarily, digest their meal, poop it out, and then continue on their evening foraging. Special kind of day roost, and it can also be used as a night roost, is a maternity roost. And maternity roosts are sites where females come together to raise their young. Males have no part of this. It's the mother bats that are coming together to raise their young. They have to stay warm because fetuses require warmth to develop, and the young require to be warm or need to be warm to develop. So unless they're really energy limited, they're going to stay nice and warm and try to grow as quickly as possible. Males don't need to do that. They can use torpor. They can drop their body temperature to save energy, and they only need to warm up when they need to go out to feed. And the last type of roost that I'll talk about are hibernacula. So a hibernaculum is a place that animals go to hibernate during the winter. And traditionally in Alberta, most of the research into hibernation focuses on caves. So caves are sites across the world where a lot of bats spend the winter. In Alberta, it's not quite the case. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more later. Trees, though, are probably the most important site for bats to roost. And during my master's, countless years ago, 15, 20 years ago now. I radio tracked bats across the portion of the boreal forest and figured out where they were roosting, and then documented the type of structure they were in and also counted the number of bats that were flying out. So I waited outside at night and did these emergence counts. Most of the bats leave at about the same time after sunset, usually within about an hour after sunset. Most bats fly out. The aspen tree seen on the left had about 100 bats in it. It's very typical for an aspen. They're not a terribly large tree. The tree on the right is a balsam poplar, and there is a longitudinal split in both of these trees that run vertically along the axis of this tree. And it provides entrance, it provides an access point for heart rot infection. And this is a fungus that grows in a lot of trees, and it causes these trees to hollow out, but it still tries to heal this wound, and it creates this perfect conditions for bats where there's a very narrow entrance that provides protection from predators, but the inside of this tree is mostly hollow. And this one had about 400 bats living inside of it, and probably more counting the pups that would have still been inside. So I used radio telemetry to find these, but if you're really observant, you can quite often find these trees without the use of radio telemetry. You can sometimes, if you're close, hear the squeaking of bats inside. And if you look at the base of the tree, you can often see bat guano or bat poop stuck to the top sides of vegetation. Rodents won't be able to defecate there. So if you see this around the base of a tree, it's oftentimes from bats. Still, it's a little bit of a needle in the haystack approach, so we don't get very many reports. So this is a radio transmitter that weighs about 0.4 grams that's glued to the back of this bat. And so far, it's the only way we have to track these bats. GPS tags are too heavy. They can only carry about 5% of their weight. So we're restricted still to these really, really small radio transmitters. They fall off eventually on their own. This picture is a perfectly designed house for bats. If you were a bat, this would be a dream location. And they really have a strong liking for log cabins, especially log cabins that have had time to age and shift and form these cracks and crevices that they can use to gain access. So in this photo, there would be bats roosting under these cedar shake shingles. As long as they're just a little bit separated so that bats can crawl under, that would be the perfect location for bats. There's a patio umbrella, that would be a perfect location for bats. There's likely crevices all throughout these logs. As long as it's large enough to stick your pinky finger into, it's pretty likely that a bat would be able to get inside. Shifting around to the other side of the house, there's this dormer that goes off the roof, and you can see this pile of guano that has accumulated on the roof as the bats fly out. There's an access point right there, and there's very likely hundreds of bats living in this house. Chimneys, perfect location. Anytime that the flashing separates around the base of the chimney or the chimney cap, it provides the perfect access point for these bats. Again, they're not creating an entry, they're just using one that already exists. Lots of people like to encourage bats on their property, which is very encouraging that so many people want to do this. I've certainly enjoyed observing the bats using bat hoses. I've installed a few, especially for research purposes. The one on the right is the largest one I built. This is a 5-chambered bat house. And this one had about 450 bats 450 bats living in this structure the last time I counted. And these are all little brown bats. There's a few features that all bat houses need to be successful. One is a landing platform. So landing platform is right at the bottom of the bat house, right where I'm pointing right there. They land on that platform and then they climb using a claw on either thumb. They climb up, get positioned, rotate their bum, and then hang upside down from their hind feet inside the bat house. Not all bat houses are thought to be good quality for bats. Sometimes they overheat, which is an important consideration when putting up bat houses. Most bat species will not use bat houses at all. And sometimes, or eventually, all these bat houses will fall apart. So unless there's regular maintenance, the bats are eventually going to find themselves homeless. So these bats in the left of this photo are bats that were overheating inside the bat house, and then they exited and crawled up along the support post to try to get away from that heat. That exposes them to potential predation, so not an ideal situation. And there's lots of concerns about how bat houses support or hinder conservation, which is why our organization, working in partnership with countless others across North America, developed the best management practices for the use of bat houses in US and Canada. It's far too long for a casual read, but as I mentioned earlier in this talk, we developed a 4-page brochure that distills it down into the essential information. Some of the key points, though, is the recommendation to not install bat houses in natural areas because there's only 2 species that will use them for the most part. And we want to avoid disrupting natural bat communities and already productive habitats. We do think they could be beneficial in already disturbed areas, and especially when an exclusion is being planned. So putting up bat houses before excluding bats from building will give them an alternative location, and then hopefully they won't move into your neighbor's house. Key to this is to not just install one bat house, but to install multiple and try to vary the sun exposure. Most of the time, bats are going to prefer the houses that are in hot, sunny conditions. But when it's 35 degrees out, which we're getting quite frequently now, when it gets to be that temperature, those are too hot. So we're encouraging bat houses to also be put up in shaded areas, such as a north-facing aspect, and to also try some other aspects like a west or an east-facing area. The vary sun exposure, have both warm and cool options, and only use large multi-chamber designs with venting in the lower third of the structure. When we're thinking of enhancing habitat, bat houses may be suitable in some conditions, but what we really need to do is to protect those really productive habitats that have access to drinking water, that provide productive habitat for prey species, and that provide shelter where they can spend the day. So these river valley areas, especially in southern Alberta, are some of the prime habitat for bats. So for cave hibernacula, I want to briefly mention, we don't actually know of very many cave hibernacula in Alberta. We know of about 10 across the province. Only 3 of those have been confirmed to have more than 100 bats. Cadman Cave is probably our best known cave hibernaculum. That one has about 1,600 bats, which is far more than any of the other caves combined. These caves we've surveyed quite frequently over the last several years. This is a photo of us accessing one in the Rocky Mountains. They require a very long, grueling, about a 3-hour hike to reach any of these caves. During the winter, when these sites are accessed to count hibernating bats. Most of the caves in the Rocky Mountains are just above the freezing point. So this one cave shown here in the Rocky Mountains is only about 1.6 degrees Celsius. Even Cadman Cave is only about 2 degrees Celsius, and they don't get that much warmer. So all the bats in these caves will drop their body temperature to about 2 degrees Celsius. Biologists have been inventorying bats in these caves for the last several years. This is a pretty typical scene. When you go into these caves, which only biologists are currently allowed to do, When you go into these caves and you look up at the roofs, some of these roofs are many meters high, you'll see these clusters of bats dispersed throughout the cave. And the trick here then is to estimate the number of bats in each cluster and to record that and then tabulate the results at the end. So these clusters can range anywhere from a single bat upwards of about 30 or 40 individuals. We've been running a citizen science project in Alberta since we began our project about 10 years ago. And so we have some really great data on the locations where bats move a roost across the province. If anyone has bats on their property, we'd love to receive a report and a sample of guano. We'll send it for DNA barcoding, which allows us to accurately determine the species using those. And so far, we found that about 86% of all of the reports are little brown myotis. Almost all of the remainder are big brown bats. But there has been a few interesting observations. And probably the most interesting of those are the observation of long-eared myotis, Myotis evotis, up in the Peace Country in northwestern Alberta. An area that species was not formally known to occupy. One of the big projects that we've been working on over the last few years that's just completed, we just completed the last of our surveys last year, and we're now working on analyzing these results. But that project is our Bats and Bridges project, where we've visited bridges across Alberta across Western Canada, I should say, to document if these bats are using these structures. This began around 2021 when myself and others were in Saskatchewan. We found one bridge in northern Saskatchewan that had about 500 bats roosting in it. And we began looking at bridges across Alberta and found that a lot of them had evidence of use by bats. You could see guano stuck to the undersides of these bridges, which was pretty solid evidence that bats were using these structures. So this photo shown here, very typical situation, a concrete bridge with these deep soffits that they can fly up and down. They love roosting on the sides of this concrete during the night, especially because this concrete stays warm at night, and it's like a heating blanket where they can rest when they're not out flying. So this photo shown here is a little brown bat gently cuddling with another bat under this bridge. And we've now surveyed about 1,000 bridges all across Western Canada, stretching from the southeastern tip of Saskatchewan all the way up into Yukon. It wasn't just us. We had countless partners that were contributing data to this project, and it's now provided a really valuable source of information on where bats are roosting so that we can collect samples for things like monitoring for white nose syndrome. This is a very typical bridge used by bats. If you look between these very narrow crevices between these beams and this particular bridge, you'd see all these bats staring back at you. These are little brown bats. This is a little brown bat maternity colony. This is a very similar situation near the ends of a bridge in a very narrow crevice. These are big brown bats. About 100 big brown bats are living in this crevice. This one I really like. If you look at this little brown bat, and there's a bulge to the right of this individual. This is a pup under the bat's wing, probably drinking milk. Kind of acts like nature's, like a natural baby wrap to prevent them from falling. This is not an uncommon scene. This is a concrete bridge. You can see all the bat guano stuck to the upper surfaces of the sides of this beam, so much so that it falls down and starts to accumulate on the lower flange of this beam. So there's a large sample here that we can collect, and we can send it to a laboratory to answer various questions, especially related to surveillance for the fungus that causes white nose syndrome. So we've been collecting samples from all of these bridges. We have about 500 bridges with guano samples that we've sent for analysis. So now I want to talk about white nose syndrome. White nose syndrome is very topical in bats. This is a disease that was first discovered around 2006 in the eastern United States in the area of in the state of New York. So it started in 2006, and ever since then, it's been spreading from province to province and state to state. And in 2022, we confirmed for the first time this fungus in Alberta. This is a fungus that grows on bats during winter. It causes bats to arouse from hibernation more frequently than would naturally occur. They burn through their fat stores and they eventually die before emerging from hibernation or before insects begin flying again in the spring. So in Eastern North America, some of these caves had thousands or tens of thousands of bats, and almost all of those bats died. So we're looking at the observed population declines in excess of 95% in some regions. For that reason, the little brown myotis, the northern myotis, and the tricolored bat in Canada were listed as endangered in 2013. And soon after, they were listed, two of the species, little brown myotis and northern myotis, were listed as endangered in Alberta. We've been leading the monitoring for this fungus across Western Canada. Since 2021, we discovered it for the first time in Saskatchewan in 2021, the first year that we actually started looking. 2022, we confirmed it in Alberta, and we've been tracking its spread ever since then. So this disease has been spreading about 300 kilometers per year, and just this year, we found it all the way up in Fort McKay, putting it well positioned to spread throughout known hibernation sites in Wood Buffalo National Park. So that's monitoring for the disease that causes white nose syndrome. We've also been monitoring for the disease itself. And the only way to do that is to catch bats at the right time of year when they're first returning from their winter hibernation sites in the spring. So this is one site along the Red Deer River where we set up mist nets to catch bats as they fly from this bat house. Mist nets are pretty similar to the ones used for birds. They're these very fine filament nets that bats fly into and become entangled, and then we can gently release them, take some samples, and then let them back on their way. And primarily what we were doing is taking wing swabs, and wing swabs can be sent for genetic analysis to confirm the presence of white nose syndrome. And we've also been observing these bats under ultraviolet light. And when we're looking at these bats under ultraviolet light, what we want to find are these nice, clean wings. This is a Western small-footed myotis that's immaculately clean. It has this beautiful black wing, shows the venation in the wing very easily. The first time we went and looked in 2023, this is what we observed. Bat wings were pretty clean, no signs of white nose syndrome. There was some obvious signs that they were peeing on each other, but other than that, there was no evidence of white nose syndrome. In 2024, however, we observed for the first time evidence of white nose syndrome, not severe infections, but it was nonetheless present. We took a biopsy, and that biopsy was viewed under a microscope to confirm that the fungus was invading the skin tissue. This year, in May, when we returned, we observed a completely different situation. These bats were in terrible condition. Under UV light, you can see pretty severe colonies of this fungus, Pseudogymnoascus destructans, that causes white nose syndrome. Under UV light, it fluoresces orange. So it's a really good indication that this fungus is present. We also found pretty substantial wing injuries. You can see a hole in this one wing. Backlit, these wings show pretty substantial signs of severe injuries. All this splotching are tissue that's been destroyed because of this fungus. If it can survive the winter, all of these wounds will eventually heal, but they'll be reinfected when they return in the fall. This is another bat wing. You can see there's some recession along the edge of the wing. Actually, this is the same wing. So this wing, backlit with normal light and viewed with ultraviolet light. This is the bat's tail membrane. It's missing a substantial chunk of its tail, probably because of an infection. This wing has substantial recession along the edge. So these bats were in very terrible condition. We also, since 2023, have been counting the number of bats in various bat boxes at our study sites. the one site that we've first detected white nose syndrome at, we've been monitoring pretty substantially. There's 13 bat boxes, and in 2023, we counted about 2,000 bats and all of them combined. Lately, there's only been 200 to 300 bats, so we're looking at about an 80% decline of bats at that area. Possibly it's not quite as severe as that because colony counts don't always correlate to population decline. As it stands right now, we've confirmed white nose syndrome in 3 locations in Alberta, mostly in the south eastern portions of the province. In the south, it seems to be bats seem to be declining, but we haven't confirmed that farther north at this time. If you've been following in the news, our organizations, along with our partners, have been applying a probiotic treatment in the hopes of slowing or reducing infections by this fungus. This probiotic contains 4 strains of beneficial bacteria that naturally occur in the environment that, when boosted, we think will give them resistance to this disease. This probiotic was developed as a collaboration with Thompson Rivers University and McMaster University and researchers at WCS Canada and others to develop and trial this treatment. And because it was already developed, we were able to apply it at a few test locations this year in areas that we know have this fungus. So this is a photo of myself spraying this probiotic treatment into a bat house in southern Alberta. And we'll be monitoring these sites over the next few years to see if the outcomes of these bats are improving. The other threat I want to briefly mention is wind turbines. And I won't go into this in too much detail, but bats seem to be attracted to wind turbines. And we're at the point now where across North America, an estimated 1 million bats are dying each year because of this threat. It's not the species that are impacted by white nose syndrome. It is instead the 3 species that migrate out of the province. So the hoary bat, the silver-haired bat, and the eastern red bat. And if you want to learn more about this, we have a video that provides an overview of the topic and potential mitigation options. You just need to scan that QR code. But because of the threat caused by wind turbines, 3 of those species, the hoary bat, the eastern red bat, and the silver-haired bat, were assessed as endangered in 2023 by the Committee on the Status of Endangered Wildlife in Canada. They have not been listed by SARA yet, but that's more of a political decision and not a scientific one. Similarly, in Alberta, the hoary bat has been assessed as endangered, but again, it has not been listed under the Wildlife Act, probably because of political convenience. So one of the questions that we have is whether bats are hibernating in caves or crevices. And given the extreme difficulty in finding caves with substantial number of bats, the current prediction is that most of our bats are not hibernating in caves, but are instead hibernating in deep rock crevices that go deep enough below ground to get below the frost line. A few years ago, researchers that are now with WCS Canada and others with the University of Calgary and the University of Regina found that bats were hibernating in deep cracks along the Red Deer River. So big brown bats with radio tags were tracked to these really steep cliffs along the Red Deer River. And during the winter, these bats were found to be crawling into these cracks. I think this one right here. And they extend deep enough that they can avoid freezing during the winter months. So that provided some of the first evidence that bats are hibernating in places other than caves in Alberta. Recently, we were invited to begin or to help with some acoustic monitoring along the Rosebud River. The Rosebud River is this absolutely gorgeous river valley that that feeds into the Red Deer River. It's just east of Calgary, not easy to get onto, but it provides these magnificent features that bats can potentially use for hibernation. This is also the site of a major racetrack development that's proposed to occur just above the valley top, which poses a major threat to hibernating bats should this project proceed. If anybody wants to know more about that, you can go to savetherosebud.ca. This is a photo of myself and others, especially with Western Skyland Trust, setting up a bat detector along the Rosebud River. This is a 3-meter pole that's connected to an automated recording unit, an ARU, that passively records ultrasonic bat calls throughout the winter months. And 4 of these were set up a few years ago. And at this one site shown here, or maybe it's a different site, but one of the sites similar to this one, there was over 5,000 bat calls recorded in the middle of winter. So from about December to February, which confirms fairly conclusively that somewhere in this valley, there is a very large bat hibernation site. And most of those calls were big brown bats or Western small-footed myotis, but there could also be some other species. So we began wondering if there's other sites of Alberta that are also important that we've been overlooking. So we had a student we worked with a student to prepare a GIS model predicting sites in Alberta where bats might hibernate. So the pink shown on this map are potential hibernation sites. This large patch right here, that's the Red Deer River, which also highlights the overwhelming importance of this particular river for bat hibernation in Alberta. But it also shows that there are other areas, such as the Peace River and lots of areas along the mountains that might also be important crevice roosting habitat. And the mountains is pretty much all highly suitable for bats, so we just ignored that. There are also a very large number of old underground coal mines in Alberta that we have not even begun to explore the potential of as sites for bat hibernation. So all those red pins shown on that map are old historic coal mines. So now, this year, beginning last year actually, and continuing for the next few years, we're deploying these bat detectors across Alberta to try to find areas where bats are flying during the winter in hopes of mapping some of the important habitats in the province that bats need for hibernation, ideally before some industrial development comes along and causes irreparable harm to those areas. So I'm running a little bit late, but I just want to conclude by talking about why we care about bat conservation. And this is probably no surprise to anyone on this call, but bats are an essential component of biodiversity. There's been research done that has shown that when bats are gone, such as has already occurred in Eastern North America, where millions of bats have already died because of white nose syndrome and wind turbine mortality, they found that when bats are gone, the use of toxic insecticides go up. So one study looking at this has found that the loss of bats has resulted in a 31% increase in insecticide use. And this was also correlated with an 8% increase in infant mortality. This study by Frank, 2024, I believe, is published in the journal Science. There's been all sorts of debates ever since of whether their conclusions are justified, but it does show a potential link between human health and bats in our ecosystem. And it's also well known that bats are important for our economy. They provide billions of dollars in free organic control of insect pests. That's also from a study published in the journal Science. So what can you do? There's lots of things, but what is most important is that we protect and restore natural habitats, especially riparian areas, wetlands, and old forests. It's important that we manage bats responsibly. That especially includes situations where they're living in our buildings and we don't want them. Even in those cases, there are some important steps we can take to ensure they're not harmed. We can also reduce the use of artificial lighting in our communities. Lots of bats like foraging around lights, but long term it disrupts their behavior and exposes them to predation potentially, and also harms the insect food webs that are supporting them. It's also important to reduce hazards. That includes things like open chimneys that don't have proper caps, things like open rain barrels that they might try to drink from and become entrapped, even water troughs used for cattle. And especially it's important to promote positive attitudes towards bats so that we can more easily make the case for bat conservation. And we need to support research and conservation to address some of the challenges that bats are facing. So that concludes my talk. Thanks everyone for listening to me today, and thank you to all the sponsors that have allowed our program to continue for another year here in the province. And I'm now available for as long as you'll keep me to answer questions.